I'm going to go right into the questions. When I was assigned the book chat, you're always trying to look for commonalities within the books, between the books, so you can start off. And the big themes in both books is the issue of grief and loss. So I thought I'll ask my panelists the heavy questions and we'll get that out of the way. And the question is, what role does your grief and loss play in writing the book?
Well, for me, the process of grief, writing the book was really how I dealt with grief. So this book, story behind it is that I started writing it basically as a series of journal entries when I was basically going through the same experience that I describe in this book, which is that I was about 26, and my mother had cancer for a while, and her health sort of took a turn for the worst, and so I went back home, and I was her caretaker. And what I did was at night, with what little energy I had, I would write down how I was feeling and what I was seeing. And the way that I process anything challenging is that I research it, I think probably as all of us do, in order to demystify and understand it. And so this book is really a result of that process.
Hello, is it on? Yes, as for me, the role of grief and loss, I actually started this novel when grief had not arrived in my life. I wanted my protagonist, right from the beginning, to be somebody that would be alone, so that she would have to rely on herself alone. So right from the beginning, I wanted my protagonist to have experienced grief. That's why I decided that in the beginning she was going to lose her family members. When I started this novel, my daughter that I lost in 2011 was alive, and actually she was one of my first readers, because I would write passages and send to her. We were both in the UK at that time. So, but during the course of writing that novel, I lost my daughter, which meant, of course, for a while I couldn't write at all. When I picked up myself again and started trying to write, I lost my son. So it was really very hard for me, but in a way, I think writing this novel also helped me, because I was able to explore really what I was feeling. And I think it helps me because I have experienced grief myself, so I was able to put myself in my protagonist's shoes. So I hope what I was able to write, when my reader reads it, will find it realistic. Thank you.
In fact, another commonality, another common thing between the two of you is that both characters come from smaller families and are alone. In your book, even though the dad is around, the character is alone. And in yours as well, her family has shrunk, and it's just her and her brother, right? So and it's striking because I want to ask, is that deliberate? Is it, because it makes the character even more desperate, even more lonelier to go through all of that alone. So why did you do that? Yeah? It's like an extra burden on your characters.
I think, it's not something I've ever really thought about, but I think, well, first of all, I come from a very small family, and I think probably by virtue of being a writer, it's a condition that I'm used to. I will say, the part that was deliberate is that I didn't include other siblings So Tandi, the main character, is an only child, and I think, yeah, there's a very simple reason for that. So at the time that this happened, I have a brother, and the way that when my mother died, what happened was it caused a lot of conflict between us, as it often does. And I was still dealing with that and only managed to resolve it like fairly recently. And I think I was still kind of working through that, and I couldn't have written it because I didn't completely understand it.
I'm from a large family. I've been blessed with sisters that are very supportive, but I wanted to write about a character because I wanted to write about self-reliance. So I thought it was important for my character to be more or less alone, so that she would have to rely on herself to sort out her problems. So in my own case, it was a deliberate thing. I deliberately set out to make my protagonist sort of alone in the world.
Zinzi, you in particular, I wanted to ask how much, because when we do Google searches, you are in the book. How much of yourself and your experiences are in the book?
So I would categorize my book as what we call autofiction, and that was a deliberate choice. So for me, there was never a point where I said, I'm going to sit down and write a novel about grief. I just wrote this book, and as I sort of explained before, it came out of journal entries. It came out of a real experience. So I fictionalized certain parts, but to me, I wanted to tell this story, and it was important to me to tell it in a truthful way. So one of the things that was really important to me was, if you read the book, there are some very sort of graphic descriptions of the process that someone undergoes when they're dying of illness. And I wanted it to be ugly because I had never really read that, and when I was faced with it in person, it was devastating. And it was really important to me that I sort of chronicle those parts of it. So for me, we can talk about truth in fiction and how elusive it can often be, but for me, this was a book that was true, and I didn't feel like I wanted to disguise it. Yeah.
Hadiza, you've said that you started your book, tell us about the inspiration of the book. I don't want to paraphrase you.
Thank you. The whole idea about the book started many years ago when I used to visit the Abuja Children's Home. That's an orphanage in Abuja. And many times when I would go there, I would be sitting with the children, and I kept thinking about them, wondering, because a lot of the children in the home were picked up as babies, some as newborn babies. And when they came into the home, it was left for the government people to choose a name for them. Yeah, and because of the way Nigeria is, there was always this competition between the Christians and the Muslims. So in that home, a method was devised so that if you pick up a child, this child will be given a Christian name, and then that child will be raised along that line. And many times I used to sit and wonder, because a baby you picked up could be from Muslim parents, but when she comes to the home, she'll be given a Christian name. And that I kept thinking about the whole issue of identity and the fact that a lot of us are who we are because of where we were born. So when you see people, sometimes when I see people getting all worked up about religion and whatever, I wonder, because really, if we are going to be honest to ourselves, we know a lot of us are who we are because of where we were born. I know a few people get to change their religions along the line, but that's a very negligible number of people. So I wanted to explore the idea of identity. So I wanted to write about an orphan boy that was raised in an orphanage who actually was from Muslim parents, but he was raised as a Christian, and what all that entailed if he would, at the end of the day, come to realize what his background was. And I wanted the matron in the orphanage to actually be his relation, which he didn't know about. So actually, this novel, that's the story now that has turned out, is actually, it came as a result of a backstory I was writing about the first book I was writing. Because the first book I was writing was about the orphan boy, but I felt that I had to make people understand why the matron would do what she did. So I started writing her backstory, and when I started writing it, I realized that the backstory was a story, it's a novel on its own. So I stopped that, I wrote this. So that's the one I'm writing now, which was actually the first book I started writing.
We have a promise for a second book. I didn't pressure her to say it. Clap for her. Thank you. I'm now going to ask them to read a section each, starting with Zinzi.
I'm going to read from the middle of the book. And this is a section that talks about the mother dying. The hospice was a new place on the top floor of a cold brick building with few windows. When we arrived, a tie-dyed social worker tried to steer me into a cheerily lit kids' room. The staff had a phrase for what was happening to my mom. Quote, the dying process. And they said the words like they should be followed by a TM. Like she was in the process of walking to the store or buying groceries. Just another thing that humans do. While my father was out grabbing us prepared sandwiches for dinner, I crept into her room. I closed the door and shoved a chair against the doorknob so no one could enter. I had many things I wanted to say. Some sleepless nights ago, I'd made a list of all the things I needed to apologize for, all the things I need to tell her I forgave her for. But as I stood there with those mathematics in hand, the weight of the moment on me, I said nothing. And when I tried to speak, only tears came. The pain was exponential, because as much as I cried, she could not comfort me, and this fact only multiplied my pain. I realized that this would be life, to figure out how to live without her hand on my back, her soft, accented English telling me, everything will be all right, Tandi. This was the paradox. How would I ever heal from losing the person who healed me? The question was so enormous that I could see only my entire life and everything I know filling it.
So I'm going to read from somewhere like in the middle of the book. The protagonist had just secured a job in an orphanage in Abuja, and that was her first day. It's a new orphanage, and some children were being transferred from an older orphanage to the place. So we're in the first day of her job when the children were brought. With the babies quieted now, Mama Ruth emerged. Miss Scholastica looked annoyed as the head nanny perched herself beside me. Go on, Mrs. Usman, ignore the interruption, she said. Mama Ruth did not react. Excuse me a minute, I said, and walked over to the dining area. Mama Basira, please take the children inside. They can finish eating there. Again, Mama Basira looked at Miss Scholastica for guidance before carrying out my instructions. Abubakar, he has epilepsy, Mrs. Usman continued on my return. So it's very important that he take his medicine every day. She's a nurse, she should know that, Miss Scholastica interjected. Have you brought it with you? I asked. Yes, I'll give you everything before you go, Mrs. Usman answered. He's supposed to take one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one at night before he sleeps. Please, let's move on. We don't have all day, Miss Scholastica snapped. I'm sorry, Ma, Mrs. Usman apologized. Solomon, that's the small one. Someone find him on a rubbish heap somewhere in Buari. They just burned him that day. He can't talk, she shrugged. We don't know what's wrong with him. Has he been assessed by a doctor? Of course, Ms. Scholastica said sharply. Do you think we neglect the children? Mrs. Usman looked down. Mama Ruth coughed twice. That's not what I meant, I said. Well, he has seen several doctors. The woman opened another file. The girl, her name is Amal. Nothing wrong with that one. The second woman, who had been silent, now cut in. No one wants her because of her mother. Is her mother alive? I asked, confused. Her mother is that mad woman that roams about in Gadam, the woman said. Someone pregnant her. It is government people that take Amal from her. I had heard of cases where men raped mentally ill women they picked up on the streets as part of a juju ritual they believed would make them rich. Miss Scholastica looked at her watch. We have to go. Just hand over the files to the matron. Mrs. Usman pushed the files towards me and stood up. Could one of you come tomorrow and spend time with the children? Miss Scholastica frowned. There's no need for that. But this place is new to them. The change of environment is a lot for young minds to process. Mama Ruth shot me a warning look. Is that your professional opinion? Miss Scholastica asked. I ignored her sarcasm and continued. Seeing some familiar faces around will make it easier for them to adapt. During the uncomfortable silence that followed, Mama Ruth pinched me 3 times. Look, matron, I've been doing this job for years, Miss Scholastica eventually said, her eyes like 2 black stones. Do you think there's anything you can teach me about the psychology of children? I'm not trying to teach you anything, I replied. I'm only concerned about the kids. They look so confused.
Now I'll go to the audience, and then in between I'll ask my own questions. In fact, I'll ask mine first, and then we'll come to you. Yes. Zinzi, in the book, talk a bit about the mother and going to the cancer treatment center and finding that there were a lot more black women there. So talk a bit about black women and cancer.
Perhaps start by reading the epigraph of the book, because it's about this. So there are actually 2 epigraphs. The first is from Audre Lorde's Cancer Journals, which is a great book everyone should read. And the second one is a statistic from the Susan G. Komen organization, which I do not co-sign, but the facts are relevant. African American women now have about the same risk of getting breast cancer as white women. However, the risk of dying from breast cancer remains higher for African American women. In 2012, African American women had a 42% higher rate of breast cancer mortality or death than white women. So this is one of the themes of the book, where I talk about inequality in issues of healthcare, and this is one thing that, another thing that I noticed when I was going through this and I really wanted to talk about. So in the States, I don't know how much everyone has been sort of following this debate, but there's a lot of conversation going on around healthcare right now, because basically we've never had state health insurance, state-provided health insurance, and it's extremely expensive, prohibitively so. And because in the States, race and class very neatly coincide, and the more melanin you have, the less money you have. So that means that if you are sick, you're more likely to go to the doctor later because you can't afford it. It means that when you're looking at treatments, you'll go for the cheaper one. And that all adds up to a higher instance of death. And the reason why I said I do not co-sign the Susan G. Komen organization, it's extremely problematic if anyone has read about it, for many reasons, but one of the main reasons that I've never liked it, and this is another thing that I talk about in the book, is that there's an entire industry built around cancer philanthropy. And when you see, especially ads for breast cancer foundations and things like this, they always have white women. They're always white people, and there's a very specific reason for that, because they're trying to get people to give them money, and they know that people will be more sympathetic to white people in the United States. And so that is sort of the sort of mediated reality that you see. But another very important thing for me to expose was that when you actually enter the space and when you have someone in your family that's sick and you're with them all the time, the reality is extremely different. And there are specific reasons for that. And that's something that I wanted to talk about.
I'll take 3 questions now. Who has the mic? There's someone right behind you there.
Hello.
I'll do. Yes.
So my question would go to the rights of the abundance of scorpions. From the first statement she made, she said many of us are who we are because of where we come from, where we are born. It also affects our identity, what we are known as. So my question is, if we don't have some sort of identity, isn't it possible that we just wander around aimlessly, not being defined by anything? Shouldn't people who have gone before us be the ones who sort of direct our path, give us something to be identified with? If we want to reject it much later, that's fine. But shouldn't there be some foundation we can work on, build on?
Hi. So my question is for both authors, and it's on cultural issues around grief. Because obviously, I mean, I haven't read the 2 books. I'm looking forward to reading them. But you talked in your excerpt about going to a hospice to see your mother, or the protagonist talked about seeing her mother. And I'm just wondering, to what extent the conditions of death, in your view, determine your ability to grieve or not to be able to grieve, particularly when you're talking about finances being an issue, when you're busy worrying about bills, etc. And then for Mrs. El-Rufai, her book is slightly different in the sense that the death was sudden and was very unexpected. And I'm just wondering, culturally, we're kind of brought up to be scared of death. In most cultures. I mean, it's a cycle of life, and there are people who tell you the best thing you can do is accept it. But I'm just wondering to what extent the way we deal with death locally sort of fed into her narration, and how her character dealt with the grief of that death.
Good afternoon. My question goes to Mrs. El-Rufai. It happened that the setting of the book is African. So, as an African, we have some belief in certain the illusion. So, what really happened is that the question is, I read last week. I read a reason. Someone was saying the reason why Tinubu lost his son because of his aspiration to contest for presidency and what have you. He was mentioning many people. Now the question is, when you lost your daughter during the course of writing, and you stopped, when you started to write again, continue the writing, you lost your son. How has that influenced your writing? And perhaps, did you survive that certain illusion of Africans in shell entirely? And if you do, then how were you able to cope with it? Thank you.
The first question was about identity.
Oh, yes.
And then the next one was about how we deal with grief.
Yes. The first question about identity, I'm not at all suggesting that people should not have identities. In fact, it's not possible. We all have identities. We all have identities based on where we are brought up, the kind of society we live in. We all have our identities. What I'm trying to say is, how shall I put it, the role of chance in identity. Everyone must have an identity. But I'm saying that sometimes the identity we have is just as a result of where we happen to be born. If we were born somewhere else, we would be completely different people. But I don't think there's anybody that would not have an identity. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Yes, cultural issues surrounding grief. Yes, that's a very interesting question, because in the book, when the protagonist lost her husband and child, as usual, because the protagonist comes from the same background as myself, a northern Muslim woman. So when she lost her family, of course, there were those that were telling her, this is God's will. And you must not cry. You should not cry. You know, crying is not good. When you cry, it's like you're adding more wahala on your dead ones. You shouldn't cry. You should just be strong. On the other hand, she had a friend that kept telling her, cry if you want to. Just cry. Tear your hair out. Just let it out. So sometimes when you are bereaved, you get confused. I've been through bereavement. And really, it's good in Africa, when you're bereaved, you have a lot of people coming to sit with you, support you. It's all well and good, but honestly, at a point, you just want to say, let everybody go and just leave me alone. But there are cultural issues, and you are not free to say what you want to say. So you have to go through the motion with lots of people coming, and sometimes it's quite annoying because by the third day, fourth day, people come, they're sitting around, they're gisting, they're laughing, they're eating, they're drinking, and you know what is paining you, you know, so that's it. How grief has influenced me. Yes, as a writer, I don't know. I'd like to think that I've used it positively. You know, I have this attitude that, well, bad things happen to us, but it depends on what you make of it. Because the fact of the matter is you cannot change what has happened. Whatever I do, I cannot bring my daughter back, I cannot bring my son back. But from that experience, probably there's something I can take from it and make something positive out of it. So, and actually that's the whole idea behind my foundation that I set up, because I want to make that pain mean something. You know, I want to use it for something good. So, grief has influenced me in so many ways. Thank you.
The question, Kadira's question to you about cultural grief.
So there's a section in the book where Thandi goes back to South Africa. So her family is South African, and they have a ritual there that we don't have in the States. About a year after a person dies, you unveil the tombstone, and they have basically like a second sort of funeral. And when Thandi goes there, she does this. She's around her entire family, and I think of that section as her being able to externalize in a certain way, in good ways and bad ways. And you know, a lot of it's through socializing and being around her family, and I think that's the one time where she's really, really not alone. And in my personal experience, I think Americans we're highly individualistic. We tend to be solitary. We deal with grief on our own. Also, you know, we say it's, you don't want to acknowledge weakness and cry and all of these things. However, I think in my experience in South Africa, you're allowed a little more permission to grieve in public. And I think that allows an important outlet for Thandi. And then I think there was another question about how your financial situation can impact your grieving process. And I think your financial situation impacts everything. You know, I'm a socialist. That is how I see the world as organized. And of course, this is one of the places where it makes a big difference. Money equals time. And that means that you can do your grieving on your own, you can pay for a therapist, you can do all of these things. It makes it easier. Absolutely.
The person that asked a question from that side, the person that mentioned about Tinubu's son dying, I don't know if I've answered your question completely because I seem to think you're referring to maybe our African superstitious beliefs. Maybe he lost his son because he was running for governor, and maybe how I felt when I lost a daughter and then a son, right? Well, for me, it has never crossed my mind that anybody did anything to cause my daughter and son to die. I'm a very, very unsuperstitious person. I don't believe at all that anybody can kill my people by proxy. So that's why I just want to clarify that, because I remember you said something about that.
I wanted to ask, An Abundance of Scorpion, I mean, it's a very contemporary novel, and it's very relaxed about the issues of religion, also about how certain northern women live their lives. Tell us a little bit about why you wrote the women the way you did, because it's great. I'm saying, yeah.
Well, first of all, I've always felt that the literature that came out of Nigeria was always from the southern Nigerian perspective. And northern Nigeria is a large place. I would say we're 50% of the population. I don't know the real statistics, but roughly. And I think we have many stories that we need to tell, especially the northern Muslim woman. There are lots of perceptions or misconceptions about the northern Nigerian woman. I think we need to tell our stories. So that's why I wrote this. I hope with this I'll encourage other people, there are many young people here, to write. We need to write our stories. Of course, while writing this story, I want to educate people about the culture. That's why I put a lot of, like, the kind of foods we eat, the way we dress, the kind of things we think about. And that's it, basically. I wish there would be more writing from northern Nigeria, especially from women.
Questions? Somebody's hand is, questions. Excuse me, but Molara has a question. She gets the mic first. Where's the mic guy? Where is my mic guy? Okay.
Thank you. One thing I forgot to say yesterday when I was introducing Ake Review for the first time, when I was mentioning the poems in there, I was going to talk about this poem by Hawa Shafi Nuhu, Al-Haya, I don't know if I pronounced that properly, which starts, "But you are Muslim." It's a poem about a northern Nigerian woman's, the sensuality of a northern Nigerian Muslim woman. And I'd like to ask Hadiza El-Rufai how you write sensuality and sex. Thank you.
Hello, my question is for Hadiza El-Rufai. An Abundance of Scorpion is an interesting title, and I'd like to know what's the inspiration between the title.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Sayadele. My question is for Zinzi. One of the things, there's a dichotomy between like blackness in Africa and blackness in other parts of the world. And when you talked about cancer, I found that pretty interesting because Nigerian women suffer from cancer a lot. And they go through the same problems as black women in other parts of the world. My question to you is, aside from like kind of the activism surrounding getting better health care for black people, particularly black women and cancer, are there other things that are being done? What other things, in what other ways are black women being helped? I mean, so that this kind of thing, even if it doesn't stop immediately, at least, I mean, there's a process that has been started that's beyond government health care, which seems dependent on race and class. Thank you.
Thank you. One question here.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Janet. I'm from Nairobi. My question is for Hadiza. I just want to take you back to what you said about Northern women needing to write more about their experiences. Is it possible that Northern women are already writing, but just not in English? And is there anything that can be done about that?
So, I've lost track. Okay, so you can start. Yes.
All right, the first question, Molara. Sex. Yeah. I think as writers, we have to be honest. So if your story requires you to write about sex, I think you go ahead and write it. But don't just plug it in there because you just want it there. As a writer, I have 3 things I always consider when I'm writing: honesty, courage, and sensibility. You have to be honest. I like to write honestly. I like to have the courage to write what I want to write. I want to say what I want to say. But having said that, of course, you have to be sensitive to, you just don't write things to offend people unnecessarily. So I think if you are guided by these 3 things, you can write whatever you write. In my book, there are 2 sex scenes. The first is an actual sex scene. The other one is like an almost, which some people regret. I did not actualize. But both scenes, they had reasons to be there. Yes, so that's why they are there. Then about the title, well, I wish I could take credit for that title. My title was a very dull title when I started. The book was called Life After Death. What? So thankfully, Lola saved me. She changed the title to An Abundance of Scorpions. And when she first said it to me, I said, look, Lola, I don't like that you're a scorpion thing, no. But after a while, it grew on me, and I think she was right because everybody seems to think that it's a brilliant title. Yes, and it's also actually a line from the book. In the first chapter, there's a line that says, I did not want to take her into the savannah bush, which had an abundance of scorpions and snakes. About the Northern women writing, yes, you're right. In fact, in Kano, lots of women write books, but in Hausa language, so I should have been more clear. What I want is more women to write in English language because I want the stories out there. Those that are writing in Hausa, they're writing for us. So it's good, they should be encouraged, but I want people to know our stories beyond our environment, beyond Nigeria, for our stories to go right across the world. Thank you.
Hold on. Zinzi, the question about what else is being done. I think she was asking a question about what else is being done about black women and healthcare, so that the morbidity rates among black women are not as, the difference between the morbidity and mortality rates between white women and black women is not so wide. So what is being done?
What's being done?
Yeah.
Sorry, to be a wet rag, not much. It's difficult. And I think this is, I cannot answer that question definitively. I don't think that there is very much being done except on a very superficial level. So one of the debates that is going on now in the United States is how do we help minorities, right? It's a very general question, but it's complicated if you sort of pick it apart. In the last election, there was this debate, sort of a false debate, I think, where somehow Hillary Clinton became the anti-racist candidate who was standing up for black people after several decades of screwing us over. And so she is sort of being promoted as, you know, the anti-racist, inclusive person against Donald Trump, who is the devil. And there's always this question about how do we help, right? And for me, the answer is very simple. We give people resources, we give people access to education, we don't redline them into ghettos. And unfortunately, in these states, we've been doing this for centuries now. So I don't think, except on a very small level, especially now, very much is being done to specifically help us as a group. However, I think that in the States, we need to get to a point where we say that we can't just pander to black women. We can't say, I'm here, I'm all in for diversity, and I believe in feminism and all of these things. That does not put food in people's mouths. So I'll say the things that are being done to help black women, if we pass Medicare for all, that will help black women, that will help black people. If we improve our public schools, that will help black women. If we, if we extend our social safety net, that will help us. On an individual sort of targeted level, it's not more complex than that, really. But I think it's amazing that we've gotten so far away from that in the conversation that we have no idea. You know, we're tearing our hair out and saying, how do we, it's very, very simple.
There's a question here.
Yeah. Mrs. El-Rufai. Oh, okay. Your book is based in an orphanage, or at least part of it, in an orphanage. And I wanted to find out from you if you had encountered any of the, marginalizations that we put on orphaned children, and the reluctance of people, infertile people, women and couples to adopt. I wonder if you came across this phenomenon. Like people saying, families advising their own members, like the women, it's better to have your own child. And some people just can't have children. And yet, the society is so tightly against adoption that they don't even give room for this alternative way of parenting. And I was wondering whether you had come across this, in terms of, I don't know about research, but dealing with orphans and orphanages for your book. And Zinzi, the issue of some of us have discovered to our horror that the issue of black people men and women, and cancer seems to be now getting negotiated even from the space where we understood cancer mortality in black women as being part of the poor poverty, marginalization that black people suffer from in places like the United States. And now, there are some of these funny messages on WhatsApp and stuff like that, where people are even beginning to suggest that the very melanin, our black skin, which, we associate with our good health, the fact that black doesn't crack, and all of that. Now they are trying to say that, in fact, it's melanin that gives black people cancer. And I'm wondering whether you've come across some of these horror scenarios.
So, Madam, answer the question first. About orphans.
Okay, yes, about the orphans. Mama, I agree with you completely. There's still that, shall I say, stigma attached to adoption, although I believe that things are changing because I know quite a number of people that have adopted. But still, there are some people that still can't get past that, because of what the society believes in. But like I said before, I think things are changing, and we hope people will be more open to it. It's so bad that some people, even when they adopt, they first of all seclude themselves for 9 months and pretend to be pregnant. Then they come and say they've had the baby. Because they just they know they've adopted, but they don't want the world to see them as having adopted. We hope that with time these things will change, because we have many, many children out there needing parents. But the other side of it is these days one has to be careful, because there are people that would want to adopt for reasons that are not noble. There's a lot of child trafficking, ritual murders. So it's really a very difficult thing, because you can't just be giving out children for adoption like that, because you don't know what some people want to use them for. So that's the thing, We just wish the good people will come out to adopt, and we have to keep on being vigilant to ensure that bad people don't adopt the children from the orphanages. Thank you.
Actually, I have a follow-up. In the book, the parents want to adopt are supposed to be vetted. And then after adoption, there's a social worker regime put in place. Is that still going on? And does it only happen at the federal level, or does it happen at the state level?
Yes, from the, at least my experience is with the Abuja Children's Home, which is a government-run home. So the Ministry of Social Welfare had some power there. So they vet the parents, and then even after the children are given out, the social worker follows up on the parents. But the fact of the matter is, these days we have all kinds of orphanages springing up, and I don't think that the social welfare ministries are strong enough to monitor them. There have been cases where some of these orphanages are accused of selling babies. Baby boys, 150,000 naira in Kaduna. Girls, 100,000. I don't know why the girls are cheaper.
Okay, Zinzi, answering the question about cancer.
The question about cancer, and it seems like these are like rumors. I haven't heard those specifically, but I'll say, it sounds like the type of thing that we've been used to hearing again for centuries. That's another way to blame us for our own illness and our own sickness and our own death. It's the same as, black on black crime. That's not a thing. It's just crime. People kill their neighbors and people they know, and people tend to live around people who look like them. I would say that. One thing I I like to bring up is they've done studies recently where they've proven that people on the whole think that black people don't feel as much pain. Sorry?
Okay, we will not have those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine? Exactly, yeah.
Okay, I have to respect Lola. I'll take one question, that one.
Good afternoon. My name is Aduke Gomez. This is just a quick question. My mother died when I was in university, and it's a question actually to both of you. How do you overcome an experience that perhaps at the time that it happened, you're the only person who has been going through that? So how do you overcome that and then write the kind of books you have both done? I think it's incredible and brave and honest and courageous. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I really liked what you said earlier about turning pain into something positive. And I felt that very strongly. And I think I was in a, I think that at the time it happened to me personally, I was also sort of isolated by age. Maybe one or two people I had known had lost parents, but not that many. And I was dealing with it very much on my own. And I think that was the only way to really make myself feel better, you know? I think otherwise, just living with this thing and carrying it around all the time feels bad. You have to turn it into something positive, and really, when I was able to do that, you know, even if I never published it or sat on this stage, the fact that I put it down into writing was extremely important. And it also taught me, you know, I teach now, and I have the opportunity to talk to and mentor younger writers, which is one of the most amazing things I've ever been able to do. And I think not only being able to do it yourself for your own reasons, but to pass it on to other people does not ever get rid of that pain, but it kind of transforms it into something else. Yeah.
Yes, when something devastating happens to one, in fact, in the beginning you think, I can't overcome this. You know, it's something you just cannot overcome. But like they say, time heals. I mean, you never really get over it, but you learn to live with it. And really turning that pain into something useful is very helpful, I think. So that's the way. You do it one day at a time.
Thank you. The books are on sale in the bookstore, so don't just listen to writers, buy their books, and they'll sign them. Thank you very much.